Well, it's one of the deadliest airline accidents to ever happen over U.S. soil and is still the source of controversy and debate. I talked to investigators and eyewitnesses to try to figure out what really caused TWA Flight 800 to explode just off our south shore.
We just saw an explosion out here on CMP 507.
TWA 800 center.
Someone about 16,000 feet or something like that. It just went down.
TWA 800, if you hear center ident.
I think that was him.
I think so.
God bless him.
At 8:31 p.m. on July 17, 1996, 230 people died when TWA Flight 800 exploded midair and fell into the ocean just south of Moriches Inlet. After a 4-year joint investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board, the FBI, and the CIA, the official report concluded that a spark in the 747 center wing fuel tank likely caused the explosion.
But again, no evidence of an explosion just from looking at the boxes.
We certainly can't tell.
We couldn't tell. It was because the way the aircraft had exploded, portions of the aircraft continued. The nose piece fell off, and then the bulk of the aircraft.
But numerous eyewitnesses, along with members of the investigation itself, say that conclusion is way off course.
There is more than plenty witness evidence that there were 2 missiles fired at sea and 1 missile fired from shore.
And we all looked out the window and we saw a large fireball coming up out of the water.
There are radar hits of debris going out the right side of the airplane in excess of Mach 4, which is about 6,000 plus or minus miles per hour.
Henry Hughes was the senior accident investigator for the NTSB at the crash site. He says radar traces show pieces of wreckage rocketing away from the jet at 3 to 4 times the speed of sound. He also points to chemicals found on the seats and portions of the fuselage. The government called it glue. He says it was explosive material. Hughes believes there's no doubt something hit TWA Flight 800.
That's an explosion that occurred external to the airplane, and we know that from looking at the victims and the interior.
Every year on the anniversary, friends and family gather here at the memorial to remember those lost in the crash. It's an ominous tribute to the 3rd most deadly aviation accident in the U.S. However, for many, the question whether it was an accident remains. More than 200 people claimed the night of the crash they saw a bright light head up into the sky, arch above, and then head directly toward Flight 800. And none of those witnesses were ever allowed to publicly testify at the NTSB hearings.
The official report is somebody's fantasy.
Fred Meyer is a retired Air National Guard helicopter pilot and decorated Vietnam veteran. He was flying a practice approach at Gabreski Airport near West Hampton the night of the crash.
Directly ahead of me, my scan picks up a rocket plume moving about 10 degrees above the horizon, moving from my left center to my further left.
Those were clearly 4 missiles. The explosions of 4 missiles or anti-aircraft weapons.
Critics of the official findings point to some of the damage in the fuselage as more consistent with a missile strike than an internal explosion. However, Jim Hall, chairman of the NTSB at the time, still stands by the report.
There was enough evidence there. I reviewed every piece of information. Everything that you mentioned was reviewed by everyone involved.
But Hughes, a veteran government crash expert, says this investigation was anything but normal.
Everything from people breaking into my hangar at 3 o'clock in the morning and removing parts, people who weren't authorized to, I might add. The FBI caught their own people breaking in and didn't know, said they didn't know why they were doing it. The whole thing was controlled.
Our agency did an outstanding job at the time, and I don't know what purpose some of these people may have in trying to keep the matter alive.
20 years has done nothing to calm the waters between the official findings of the government and those who remain on board with the missile theory.
This was on American soil on a beautiful summer day, and 230 people on a commercial airliner were killed when it was shot down off Long Island.
To this day, that crash has not officially been cleared of criminality, and the investigation remains open, both from the NTSB and the FBI. We have more information on the competing theories of what caused Flight 800 to crash on our website, news12.com. And if you'd like to watch more of our interviews with the individuals involved in the investigation, plus additional archive footage from the scene, just go to channel 612 and click on News 12 Extra. Well, joining me now in the News 12 studio, Dr. Michael Kanders, the director of Farmingdale State College's Aviation Center and a retired Air Force pilot. Appreciate your time tonight. Let me start off just because we had a piece last night on its controversial theory. Do you prescribe to the missile theory of the plane, a missile taking down that plane?
Well, I listened to some of the accounts, and many of them were very credible, but I actually don't subscribe to it because there really wasn't any evidence to support the theory. Okay.
Well, let's talk about the FAA. It was 12 years before some serious changes were even really proposed and implemented. Why so long?
Well, that's a great question. The accident happened in 1996. The rule was issued in 2008 for implementation in 2014 and to finish implementation in 2017. When the rule was first issued, operators had to complete half their fleet with this change to these fuel tanks by December of 2014 and the balance by 2017. So that's a great question. I don't know why it took so long.
Now, we asked both the FAA and the NTSB. They never really came to a definitive conclusion that they could prove as to what caused the explosion in the craft. We asked if that may have had something to do with why it took so long. I'm going to play a soundbite for you and ask you a question on the other side.
If we had a very direct, obvious cause of the accident, which the NTSB did not, if we had one, I think it would have been a very different environment. We could have zeroed in on that solution. We could have changed it, made fixes to it. But the fact that we didn't have that, we began evaluating what potential ignition sources could occur in a fuel tank, and we were stunned to find out just the volume of potential sources. And of course, we issued many directives to redesign those parts. But that also tells you, if there's so many, that how do you know you've got them all? And that's what compelled us to look for this gas inerting system.
So let me start by asking you this. They never really found the definitive cause. Should they have? Is that a failure of the FAA and the NTSB?
Well, sometimes in some circumstances you can only determine the most probable cause. There's no definition in every case, and that's what happened here. They said, well, we don't definitely know that it was the ignition of this fuel tank, but the evidence suggested that that was the probable cause. So on that basis, they needed to move forward with these changes. So the idea that because they weren't certain it took so long, I'm just not buying that.
Okay. Is it a failure then that it took so long? And is there a correlation between the fact that they can't prove exactly what caused TWA Flight 800 to explode and the length of time that it took to implement changes?
Yeah, there shouldn't be any correlation. Once they make the decision that they're going to make these safety improvements, they need to make them. They need to make them in a timely fashion. So delaying them because they weren't sure, it doesn't really make any sense. They made the decision to make the safety change, make the safety change.
Okay. Now, and then let me ask you this, the title of the piece, Lessons Learned. Have there been lessons learned? Have we learned enough from that crash?
Well, I hope so. I mean, the implementation of the safety provisions in the tanks have been underway for a while now. So I think that there's always lessons learned in every accident. The delay here, I think, is unacceptable. I'm not sure what the reason is. I do know working locally with the FAA, great people, very safety-minded, understaffed. So I think it's time that the FAA take a hard look at how they're investing in safety. There might be a need for more resources thrown at the problem.
And 20 years later, Fred Fritz Meyer remains vocal about what he saw that night. Fred joins us now from Smith Point County Park at the TWA Flight 800 Memorial. Appreciate you taking the time to talk with us tonight, Fred. All right, it's been 20 years.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And it's been 20 years. Take us back, July 17th, 1996. Let me ask you this directly. Any doubt in your mind that night when you were headed toward Gabreski Airport that you saw a missile, an actual missile, heading up in the air toward Flight 800?
There's no doubt in my mind. I flew helicopters over North Vietnam. If I didn't know what a missile looked like, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I saw a single missile. I tracked the missile to its explosion, and I saw a total of 4 ordnance explosions before the petrochemical explosion, which was the tank fuel in the aircraft.
Well, one of the things that we found curious here is the chairman at the time, James Hall, the chairman of the NTSB, he was supposed to interview all of the witnesses. There were hundreds of witnesses who claimed to have seen a missile-type object heading up into the air. He admitted to us that he did not, because the scene was so chaotic, he did not get a chance to interview all of those witnesses. I'm going to play a soundbite for you, and at the other side of this, I'm going to ask you some questions.
The FBI and their agents were trained and did their job as they thought it should have been done for a criminal investigation. We would have approached it much differently, but to be honest, we didn't have the number of people to go and immediately talk to hundreds of people on Long Island that were saying they had witnessed this event.
Well, Fred, now you yourself gave your statement to the FBI. Tell us about how that happened and your experience of giving your statement to the FBI.
All right. The FBI did not come to me, the commanding officer of the helicopter unit of which I was a member, told me to go to the East Meriches Coast Guard station, seek out the FBI, and give them my story. I flew over there in a helicopter with friends. I was dropped off. I went to the trailer. I knocked on the door, and a man came out, stripped to the waist, very muscular. It appeared that he had been lifting weights in the trailer. And I told him who I was, and I told him I came to tell him what I saw. He seemed stunned. He said, just a minute, and he closed the door. And I could hear on the other side of a very thin trailer door that there was a discussion going on that went on for 3-4 minutes. When the door opened again, another gentleman, this one dressed, came to the door and asked me who I was. I repeated my identification. And then I was told to go into another room in the trailer and sit down with this muscular gentleman who had put on a T-shirt at that time. He took out a small spiral notepad about, maybe 2.5 inches by 4 inches, and sat across from me on a small table and said, "What did you see?" Realizing that I was speaking to the FBI, I gave a very lengthy and detailed description of everything I saw. And when I finished, he said, "Is that it?" I said, "Yes." I noted that he had not written a single thing. He had not made a pencil mark on his notepad. And he said, "Okay, you can go," and I left.
And you left, and you never heard from the FBI again as far as giving statements before. You also say that you saw not just one explosion, but you're saying there were multiple missiles, 4 explosions that happened on that plane that night, right?
I saw one missile. I saw 4 high-velocity ordnance-type explosions, and a 5th explosion, the last one, was petrochemical. Now, what's the difference? Ordnance explosions are very fast, over 2,500 feet per second in expansion. Petrochemical explosion is well under that, maybe somewhere around 1,000 feet per second. It's perceptible to the human eye. You can see which one is ordnance and which one is petrochemical.